This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to United Way Chinese Community Advisory Council 2022 event, United We Stand, an anti-Asian racism forum. The event will begin very, very soon. And for someone who need the Chinese translation, the following message is for you. OK，需要我们中文翻译的伙伴，请在咱们现在看到的这个 Zoom 菜单的下方，先点击这个 Interpretation， 有一个地球这个形状的图标，然后选择中文的这个中，Chinese， 进入这个中文频道，然后你就会听到有一个同声传译。那我们所有的英语都会在这个频道里边以同步的中文的方式出现。Okay, so for those of you who's joining us, welcome to United Way Chinese Community Advisory Council 2022 event. United We Stand, an anti-Asian racism forum. Okay, so our event will begin very, very soon.
哪一个是地图？我看不到。
好像下面的地球没有出现。
Okay, I can hear people are talking. So let me explain that one more time in Chinese so that you know how to select the right channel. 那对于我们刚才说话的中文能够听懂普通话的伙伴你可以看一下，在你的这个 Zoom 界面的右下方有一个小地图这样的一个图标，然后你可以点这个图标，然后在里边选择那个中文的频道，然后同时你也可以看到在我们的聊天区有一些中文的这个指示说明这个时候你可以把这个频道调到翻译的频道，这样的话你就可以同步的听到我们英语翻译出来的中文，好不好？ Okay, so I see we almost have 100 people joining us, so welcome again.
点出来有个中文，你就选择中文吗？
我哪都没有啊？
这没有啊。
Okay, can I ask our tech support to please mute everyone because we have a lot of people on the line at the same time. So if you can, please mute yourself first because our event will begin very shortly. Once again, I want to welcome everyone. Right now, we have more than 100 people joining us. Okay, so on behalf of the United Way Greater Toronto's Chinese Community Advisory Council, CCAC, I wanted to warmly welcome everybody. Okay, and my name is Leo, and I'm the Vice Chair of United Way Chinese Community Advisory Council, also one of the hosts of today's event, United We Stand.
We can't hear you, Leo.
Okay, so I was unmuted. Sorry, I don't know where I was, but let me repeat what I just said. Okay, so
管上干什么？
你管俺们别。
管
okay,
了咱怎么听？咱怎么说？
so can I ask the tech support to unmute everyone except for the host tonight, myself, Leo,
听得到。
管呢？
and Irene? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so on behalf of the United Way Greater Toronto's Chinese Community Advisory Council, I wanted to warmly welcome everyone. My name is Leo. I'm the Vice Chair of United Way Chinese Community Advisory Council, also one of the hosts of today's event, United We Stand. Even though this is an online forum, we wanted to create an offline feel. So I appreciate if you can turn on your camera so that we all can see your beautiful faces. All right, so for those of you who need the Chinese translation, the following message is for you. 那我们需要中文翻译的伙伴，请在你看到的这个 Zoom 界面的下方点击 Interpretation 这个地图形状的图标，然后进去之后呢，选择中 Chinese 进入中文频道。Okay, so with that being said, I'm now going to pass the mic to my colleague Irene. Irene, please unmute yourself.
你好，讲听中国话。
My name is Irene, the Vice Chair of United Way Chinese Community Advisory Council, and I am also the host of today's event. United We Stand is an anti-Asian racism forum hosted by the Chinese Community Advisory Council of United Way Greater Toronto. United We Stand is a forum about empowering the community to stand up together against racism in today's context. You will hear from our distinguished keynote speaker and panelists as they present on the impact of racism on the Asian community and share strategy for dealing with related incidents. On behalf of United Way Greater Toronto, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is a traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Anishinaabe, and recognized most recently as the territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. The territory was the subject of an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work present in this territory.
Well, thank you, Irene. Before we move on, I do like to begin by sharing some housekeeping items. Okay, so firstly, we ask if possible, please turn on your video. This helps to create an engaging experience we hope everyone to achieve this evening. And by the way, I see a lot of beautiful faces here. Okay, I see Helen, I see Jin Qing Xu, Lindsay, Andrew Lee. Okay, I see many people's faces. So we appreciate if you can turn on your camera. Okay, as mentioned previously, simultaneous interpretation in Mandarin is provided for this event. This event will be recorded. As you can see, it's actually being recorded to ensure we are able to capture all of the great conversation and inspiring messages. Next, we will also take a few screenshots pictures throughout the event, which means having your cameras turned on gives us your consent to use the pictures in future reports, newsletters, and social media as appropriate. We ask that as we welcome speakers, you participate by using your engagement icons located in the More section of your Zoom control panel. Okay, so you can use clap icon or thumb up icon. Also, we will be keeping everyone on mute just so that we can keep the flow of the event. Okay, but that is where your engagement icons come in handy. And for the panel discussions, for the panel sessions, please submit your question to the person through chat named Q&A. Okay, Q&A. If you do have question during the panel discussion, we will collect your questions and the popular question will be asked to our panel following their shares. Okay, so here is a question we have for you. We would love to get your engagement and input. So I see so many people joining us this evening. Okay, I see so many people. Let me see how many people are right now. We have 112 people in total, and I'm curious to find out where you're from. So please answer this question on the screen that you see. Which region, okay, are you joining us from this evening? Are you from Peel? Are you from Toronto? Are you from York? Or you're even outside the greater Toronto area? Okay, we would love to hear from you. Okay, so as you can see, that's great. Wow, I love you guys so much. You guys are so engaged. As you can see, we have a lot of people joining from Toronto, about 47%. And we have a lot of people from Peel region, about 30%. Okay, and also 14% of people are from York region, and we have close to 10% basically outside GTA and even Canada. So no matter where you're coming from, once again, I want to just welcome you on behalf of the United Way Greater Toronto's Chinese Community Advisory Council. Okay, so enjoy the rest of the event. Over to you, Irene.
With great pleasure, I would now invite United Way, Greater Toronto's Chinese Community Advisory Council Chair and host of today's event, Josephine Bao, to speak a few words. Josephine has been a volunteer since 1997. She has won many accolades and awards from governments and non-profit organizations for her leadership and contribution. Josephine, over to you.
Thank you, Irene. It's my pleasure here to welcome everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is very exciting, our very first significant event since the 2019 symposium at UTM. We, the United Way Chinese Community Advisory Council was created in 2006, but was launched in May 2007. Now, today we have the pleasure of having today we have the pleasure of having, Dr. Joseph Wong and Sharon Douglas, who were instrumental on the launch day with us tonight. So thank you. And happy birthday to the Chinese Community Advisory Council. The Chinese Community Advisory Council is actually a voluntary advisory body, although it says advisory. But we have done a lot more beyond the role of an advisor, because we are a very action-oriented group. Now, it was actually created to increase United Way's understanding of the challenges affecting the Chinese community, so that we can work together to solve the complex issue in a collegial way. Now, you see, this is the photo of us on the launch day. Everybody looks good. And you see Sharon Douglas, whom I mentioned, is on the right side. And to this day, Nellie Gong, Shirley Chen, and myself are still working hard on the council. And we are very loyal to United Way. And Shirley, thanks very much for taking the lead tonight on the simultaneous interpretation, which is a technology breakthrough we're trying. And thanks to Professor Zhang for preparing us to a lot of field tests to come to today. Of the 14 members, of Chinese Advisory Council, we actually have them, across GTA. There are professionals from different sectors across GTA, so that we can look at issues across GTA as now United Way serve the Greater Toronto area, and we have to move up to expand our membership and to align with the mission of United Way Greater Toronto. Now, these folks are well connected, and they are very enthusiastic as well. So I thank them for their hard work on tonight's work. Now, together, we champion and support United Way's work and to eradicate poverty. Like people always have the misunderstanding that Chinese community is rich. It's not always. It's not. We are so diverse. There's always diversity within diversity. Okay. Now, after the launch, we start two groups of work. First, we have to understand the needs and challenges of the Chinese community. And then after we have done the very, very first community forum on the Chinese community, we established a lot of collective impact initiatives to help us to improve the services to the community. So all these are the partnership. Some of them we created, some of them are collaboration, some of them are cooperative. Okay, now for the last 2 years, since the COVID, anti-Asian hate was really rampant, and then lots of incidents happened. And we just really want to remind everybody that, this is also anti-Asian hate, anti-Asian racism is a social virus. I mean, the COVID, they will find people who are not, vaccinated and so on. But, this one really hurts everybody. It's not just really is irrespective of our background, whether it's, the language or our religion, everybody hurts. When a group is hurt, there's no harmony in Canada. So we must don't take the chance. And now is the time we have to carry on our work. Now, for the past 2 years, the Chinese Advisory Council was very, very advanced. They already have done 7 workshops on, how to understand what is anti-Asian hate and also how to handle it. So we already got that. That is the information. We send it out on, timely fashion directly to the people in the community. However, we also have a group who's very keen on, making, connection with the policymakers and also the CEO in the community. So that's handy that we have 2 major, partnership. One is with the University of Toronto and United Way Greater Toronto to work on the ED&I leadership. So you will hear from us more later as the event comes up, and we wish you to join us. Now, if anybody can flip to the last line. The last line, actually this one, I really just want to remember, no incident is slight. Please report. COVIDracism.ca, you can do it online after the event. Don't do it right on the spot. Now, 911 is when you sustain an injury, or your property, has is under threat. Now, 211 is when you don't know an emergency number of the police, so you can call 211 for help. 211 is actually financed by, is a hotline financed by United Way. And so I really hope that these things will never happen to you. However, we need to be proactive. So a big thank you for your participation in tonight's forum. Stay tuned for our fabulous work, panelists and keynote speakers. Thank you.
Okay, give a round of applause to Josephine Bao. Thank you very much for your speech. And now I have the honor to invite Mr. Nation Chan, Vice President, VP, Community Opportunities and Mobilization at United Way of Greater Toronto to bring greetings. As United Way's Vice President of Community Opportunities and Mobilization, he oversees United Way's research, public policy, and public affairs strategies, strategic initiatives, and United Way Greater Toronto Reconciliation and Equity Action Plan. So Nation, by the way, I love the photo that you have right now on the PowerPoint. And Nation, over to you.
Thank you, Leo, Josephine, and to all of the Chinese Community Advisory Council members. I'm going to keep this short to try to catch us up. We're running a little behind, so I'll keep my remarks really short, but not without saying a big hail up to my sister Sharon Douglas, who is online, as I understand. I miss you. I look forward to seeing you. It's important to start there because it's Sharon's hard work that in formation with a number of the members, longstanding members of the Chinese Community Advisory Committee, that has established this asset that we have in community that is the voice of the Chinese community in Peel and now across the GTA. It has been a vital connection to the Chinese community and worked to shine a light on issues most recently around anti-Asian hate and discrimination, hosting a series of workshops with both grassroots and mainstream organizations, ultimately engaging hundreds of participants. This work is incredibly important to us, friends. United Way is committed to reconciliation and equity because we understand that poverty and discrimination are intertwined. All the data points to this fact. Our mission to meet urgent human needs and improve social conditions centers our work on addressing poverty and the systemic barriers that lead to long-term social, economic, and health disparities and generational disadvantage. Racism and discrimination are part of the root causes of poverty and help to explain why poverty impacts some groups more than others, most notably Indigenous, Black, racialized women, two-spirited, LGBTQ2 individuals, and people with disabilities. And the Chinese community has certainly felt the impact of systemic racism and cultural bias in the last 2 years, as the research has demonstrated. We are a funder, a partner, a cross-sector innovator, researcher, and advocate, and a fundraiser. In addition to providing funding over $8 million to 53 agencies and programs that serve the Chinese community, we are also working behind the scenes to change systems. We want to ensure that everyone, regardless of postal code, where you come from, when you got here, has equal opportunities to thrive. Our research, the Vertical Legacy Report, Social Capital Report, case studies, a plethora of report that's come out of Peel, supported by the Chinese community, solidifies the purpose of our work. Just before the onset of the pandemic, recent University of Toronto graduate Kenneth Lin helped to launch a website with the Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter for reporting incidents of anti-Asian racism. In 2021, the site logged 943 reports, a 40% increase over the year before. That sets the tone and the importance for this conversation. I will pause there and I will thank the coordinators of the CACAC for creating this very important forum to have this conversation and continue to mobilize the community to be one voice and to say, united, we will stand against racism in any community and the harm that it causes to anyone. Back over to you, Leo.
Oh, thank you, Nation. Thank you, Nation, for highlighting United Way's commitment to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and resources dedicated to anti-racism work. And thank you, United Way, Nation, and all the United Way staff for being a funder, a partner, a cross-sector innovator, and an advocate for the Chinese community. Now, Irene, I pass the mic over to you.
Now it is with great pleasure that we welcome Olivia Chow to deliver a keynote address on systemic racism through the lens of her experiences. Olivia Chow is the founder and executive director of Institute for Change Leaders at Toronto Metropolitan University, where she leads the Institute's educational initiative and has helped train thousands of activists in political organizing. She served 2 terms as a school trustee, 4 terms as a Toronto City Councillor, and 8 years as a member of Parliament. We will be posting Olivia's bio in the chat. Welcome, Olivia. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Lê Ho, cậu ấy Lô Anh Ca, and all the guests here. Wonderful seeing all of you. Yes, united we stand, absolutely. And thank you for being with us tonight, actually. So what I thought I would do is quickly look at some of the possible forms of racism that we experience. And Nation already talked about how during COVID times, we get blamed because, oh, didn't COVID come from China? So you folks must be the one that is at fault. And of course, root cause of racism has a lot to do with alienation, hate, ignorance, etc. And yes, Nation already talked about that there's been a fairly severe jump in terms of racist incidents. We've seen this, and I don't need to drill and talk more about it. We know of friends that have experienced it. We saw it in the media, and also, this go back to China, that kind of those kind of insults we've heard before, and I certainly have. But what I thought I would do is take one case, an old case that Dr. Joseph Wong, because he's here, would absolutely remember, and it is the W5 movement. What happened there? Well, imagine watching TV one day in CTV, big channel, and then they have a documentary that said, these people, these folks, Chinese looking, they are the ones that causing you and your daughters and your son to not be able to get into universities. And all these folks, foreigners, okay? Well, the Canadians, they so happen to have black hair and yellow skin, they're Chinese Canadians, but multi-generations of Canadians. So I want to take this incident and talk about how the community came together, because there's a lot of lessons we can learn from it. They organized and brought people together. Okay, and it's really important for us to think about how to win campaigns. And I want to dissect a winning campaign in terms of what are the elements of beating racism, and what's the aspect of it that could deal with racism, especially systemic racism that is organized by people or that is inflicted to the Chinese Canadian community by people that have more power. And if and when we face that kind of campaign, it's really important for us to have a very clear message. It's not fair, and it's very clear that that TV channel at that time is CTV, had it was a racist incident, and we need to do something about it. So what happened was Dr. Joseph Wong and many other people had people telling their stories. So we felt the pain of what the students, the University of Toronto students, were feeling when they were called foreigners and they were blamed. And because of the stories and because they went to a lot of different places, they gathered a lot of momentum. It's a ground organizing. And they were very clear in their goal. They need CTV to really apologize. And so through the storytelling, through the organizing from coast to coast to coast, they came together. It had a good ending. They were able to win. And thus the formation of the Chinese Canadian National Council. And it wasn't a minute to because of CCNC, they were able to, at that time, push the government, and later on, push the government to say to the Chinese Canadian community that having these people, this is the Chinese workers at the time, at the turn of the century, that helped build the railroad. And they are the ones that were told that they need to pay head taxes in order to come to Canada. So it's a systemic racism that is embedded into a government. And how could you win such a huge campaign? This is the head tax that they have to pay. And finally, there was an apology. This is then Prime Minister Stephen Harper saying apologize and providing a redress to a head taxpayer. It's because of the formation of Chinese Canadian National Council and because of the strategy that they had by working together, coming together, building a strong base, working inside the government, but also applying a lot of pressure outside the government, that they were able to win. Okay, so what I'm describing is both a government and a system that is embedded into the psyche at that time back then of the society at turn of century and then later on in the 70s. What about now? What about now? Okay, what do we do now? So enough talking about system. But we occasionally get racial incidents, racist slur inflicted on us. This is a Toronto Sun cartoon. That's me, by the way. Does that look like me? Okay, at that time when I was running for mayor, I was wearing a pair of glasses, okay? And I know it's horrific. I'm wearing a mouse suit. I don't even own a mouse suit, okay? I'm on a skateboard. I don't know how to do skateboard. And I'm stepping on the coattail of my late husband, Jack Layton, okay? So why is this racist? A, I have slanted eyes. B, mouse suit. C is sexist because I'm standing on the coattail and I've been in okay, it's insulting and it's a horrible ad, right? And not ad, it's a horrible cartoon. This came out the day of the election, all right? And during the entire election campaign in 2014, I was subjected to people calling me, go back to China, okay? And during big events. And even I initially wasn't sure precisely how to deal with it. Because I thought, what? I represented Canada to China. I was the vice chair of the Parliamentary Affairs, China-Canada Parliamentary Affairs Committee. I was the vice chair. I was helping Canada sell lobster, red wine, pork, and beef to China. How could it be that I was born in Hong Kong? So when it happens to us individually, even though I was very, very involved in the W5 movement in trying to get redress, I was very involved in Ping Fan Yan Tao Sui, which is the Chinese head tax redress, that whole campaign to get Stephen Harper to apologize. I was in the House of Commons. So I had experience dealing with systemic racism. I had experience dealing with people yelling at me in the streetcar, calling me all types of names because of my black hair. But under a lot of pressure, it's difficult to deal with. And that's where the training comes from. That's one of the reasons why I do what I do now. I run the Institute for Change Leaders because I want to train people both how to deal with individual racism by practicing, by being prepared, by role playing, by getting a support group around you, by naming it, calling it, and dealing with it, confronting it, okay, to then cultural racism, to systemic racism, or racism that's inflicted by a power that's much bigger than we are, whether it's a big corporation or a government. I want to teach people how to do it. And I briefly show, how do you run a campaign? And I find that it's really important that we learn how to do it. In Chinese, to wrap up, there's a Chinese saying, 吃得苦中苦，方為人上人. It's actually about eating bitterness. When something happened to us, we become bitter. But we can transform that bitterness into sweetness, from sorrow into joy, from being fearful into hope, and from feeling alone to say that no, united we stand. We are together. We are stronger together, and we will not wait any longer to claim our place, and we will not tolerate racism any longer. And united, we will be successful. So, message tonight, turn that bitter, don't eat it. Well, you can eat it, you can be a leader and eat it, and then transform it, because that act of transformation gives us strength and gives us hope. And that's what United Way and all of you being here, coming together, giving all of us strength and hope. Thank you so much for listening tonight.
Olivia, you are an inspiration. I draw so much energy and power from you and the legacy that you've left behind. And the legacy you continue to carve by passing on your wisdom to those who have the great privilege to learn from you. You've reminded us that systemic structural racism, beyond the personal slights that we may experience, requires clear messaging, clear demands, and mobilizing, organizing, and creating structures to fight against the system. An example of which is the Chinese Canadian National Council. You've reminded us, and as much as my mom used to still cooks bitter melon with some coconut milk. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, yummy.
So bitter things can nourish us.
Absolutely.
You've
as long as we transform it and not have it stuck inside us.
It is on that note, this idea of transforming the bitter, the fear, the hurt into something that is transformative. Speak to us, one question only, because I'm mindful of time, Olivia, and then we're going to turn it over to the next portion of our session. How do we help others outside of our community who are in positions of power, who are the norm, if you will, the holders of power, those of European descent, those who hold positions of power? How do we help them to get over their own fear so that they can be allies and agents of change, and the change doesn't just sit on the communities impacted by racism?
I think through storytelling. We're humans. When we hurt, and when we communicate that hurt, when we show that there are moments that we feel helpless when we're bullied, whether we're bullied because we are short, or we are tall, or we are of a different color, or because we have money or not have money, we're bullied because we're LGBTQ or not, it doesn't matter. When we get bullied, we hurt. When we feel helpless, we hurt. And when we communicate that we can all connect with each other through our stories, because we are hardwired to hear stories. You know, when you go, like when you tell as a parent, you read to your kids, you tell a story to your kids. We're hardwired to remember stories. We're not hardwired to remember 40% experience racism. No, we're hardwired to remember a story of how they've been insulted and how it hurt. And I think we can cross the common or find the bridge, find the common ground by connecting through each other's stories. And it could transform the apathy, the kind of I'm alone, to I can't do anything, towards yes, I can make this happen. I can make change. I have the power. I'm angry. I'm hopeful. I'm going to do this. I'm going to work together. We have solidarity. We are stronger together. Once we have that, once we tap into that, watch out. Watch out. It can happen. So whether we're poor, rich, whatever skin color, let's hear each other's story and connect through our common humanity and our core value of justice, generosity of spirit. Those are the things that United Way stand for. Those are the things that brought us here together tonight. So let's work towards it. We can do it together. Nation, you're muted, but thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Shortly, for the reminder of the power of storytelling to transform systems, to change hearts and minds, and to mobilize collective action against racism. We are going to go into our second half. So a round of applause for Olivia Chow. Thank you, folks. I would like to move us into the panel session of our event. And for this, I would like to welcome Betsy Chung, our panel moderator. Betsy is a board member of United Way Greater Toronto and the EVP, Global Chief Marketing Officer of TD Bank Group, where she oversees the articulation of TD's purpose-driven strategy across its global footprint. Betsy is an international executive with expertise as a Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and a P&L. Betsy has been recognized for her impact and excellence in Canadian leadership and was named a 2020 recipient of the Globe and Mail Report on Business Best Executive Award, Sales and Marketing. As a key member of TD's Inclusion and Diversity Leadership Council, Betsy is champion of inclusion and diversity. She's active on TD's Enterprise, Women in Leadership and Visible Minority Committees, and chairs the TD Marketing Black Colleague Network. Betsy, thank you for being with us this evening. I will turn it over to you for the panel conversation.
Thank you, Nation, and hi, everybody. And that was super inspiring. So thanks so much, Olivia, for being with us. I took many notes, and I'm sure a lot of people took a lot away from that discussion. And so, Nation, I'm just going to maybe launch into our panelists because we've got a super panel of panelists today. I read all their bios and I'm so impressed, and it's an honor to be able to facilitate this panel. So we have Alfred Lam, and he is the Executive Director and for the Center of Immigrant and Community Services. All the bios are in the notes, and so please take a look at that. And we have Jen Ling Chang. She's an anti-racist educator and former Associate Director of Toronto District School Board. We have Justin Kong, and he is the Community and Labor Organizer Educator, the former Executive Director, Chinese Canadian National Council, the Toronto chapter. And last but not least, we've got Huigui Zhang, and he is the Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, University of Toronto. And I actually said that I have very poor Mandarin skills, so I'm really hoping that I actually pronounced everybody's names properly. If I didn't, please correct me. But with that, welcome all of you. Just really pleased to have you here today and spend time with us. We're so glad that you're able to share your thoughts and insights with us. And then I think we'll just start with Justin, who will share about the research he's doing as part of the Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter on anti-Asian racism in Canada. So let's start with Justin.
Hi, Betsy. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's so great to be here with you all today. Thank you for inviting me. I served as Executive Director of the Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter from 2018 to 2021. And so Josephine invited me to speak a bit about the first report that our organization wrote at the beginning of the pandemic. It was published in 2021. And really, it documented a year of racism towards the Chinese Canadian community, against Asian communities. And so, but before I talked about that, I really did want to highlight, you know, anti-Asian racism, xenophobia, and anti-Chinese racism is not new. It's been here since the beginning. It's foundational. Chinese Canadians were the first group to be legally excluded from Canada and from the United States through exclusion acts, right? First through the head tax and through outright exclusion in Chinese Exclusion Act. So I think that's really important perspective, right? Because from the very beginning, I think the history has shown us that it is through fighting for inclusion, fighting for justice, working with other communities, other racialized communities, and fighting at all levels, fighting sometimes in organizations, making sure that, you know, our voices are heard within different institutions, like y'all are doing here today at the United Way, right? Making sure that, you know, Asian voices are heard at the United Way, and making sure that those issues are also addressed. And so I think in that spirit, what really struck me about the report and doing the research was just how pervasive that anti-Asian racism was. And it ranged, of course, from, you know, the racial slurs and the remarks, you know, getting shouted by people on the street to, you know, outright acts of violence, right? And I think a really important part for us to really distinguish is the types of anti-Asian racism that exists, right? For example, one of the really big parts of I think the anti-Asian racism was anti-Asian racism towards workers, towards people who were serving on the front line, people who were workers who were in the healthcare, people who were grocery store workers. And so during my work there at CCNC Toronto, we were connected with these people and we heard those stories, right? About how, you know, and we saw, you know, in the news and in social media, the grocery store worker was yelled down, told to go back to China, and all these things, right? Just because he told this person to wear a mask, right? To, you know, healthcare workers who were spat on because, you know, there was this racialized assumptions being made that, you know, Asian people, you know, were bringing the virus here, right? And so, yeah, I think that research really illustrates the importance that we have an intersectional lens and that we make sure we focus on marginalization, right? Communities that face marginalization need further support, right? And so when we are combating anti-Asian racism, we need to have a lens around that, right? And so I think there's a lot of great work going on supporting workers' rights, fighting against anti-Asian racism. The work of Butterfly and the work of CCNC Toronto right now is also amazing work, right? And so I want to close on the last point, and that is we need to fund anti-racism work. We need to fund anti-racism work and not just talk about it, because we have a very, very bad tendency in society to talk about it but not to fund it, not to put the resources towards resolving the issue. And I can tell you, our COVID racism website, it was funded through, of course, many years of struggles by you know, elders like, you know, Dr. Joseph Wong and Olivia and many other folks. But even that project is not funded today. Even though, you know, I want to give a big shout out to Jessie Tang, who is an executive director at CCNC Toronto. Even though they've managed to keep the project going, the government hasn't funded that project, hasn't continued to fund that reporting system, right? So when we fight against racism, we need to make sure there is money to match the talk, right? Not just talk, put the money where your mouth is at. And on the last point, building solidarity is critical. Building solidarity within our communities, within Asian communities, within the Chinese Canadian community is critical, but so is building solidarity with other racialized communities in the fight for racial justice, right? Whether that's fighting against anti-Black racism or Islamophobia, and making sure that, you know, Chinese Canadian communities understand reconciliation and the experiences of Indigenous communities. These are things that we will need to achieve in order to successfully fight against anti-Asian racism. We need to build solidarity within our communities and build solidarity across communities to make sure that we're fighting white supremacy, calling it out, and tackling it head on.
That's great. Thank you, Justin. Really appreciate that. And it's very enlightening. And I learned a lot from what you just mentioned. Maybe let's take maybe a different angle now in terms of the research work. And I know that Professor Zhang, who actually comes from University of Toronto, where I studied, has done, yes, has done a lot of research in terms of racism experienced by older Chinese immigrants. And through your research, Professor Zhang, maybe if you can talk to us a little bit about the findings that impact anti-Chinese racism, especially challenges facing our Chinese seniors. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Betsy. My talk will be based on both my academic work and my community work. The scholarly work is based on two research projects. One is focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on Chinese communities. The project led by Professor Wang Peizhong and Professor Yang Lixia, and that is supported by the Advisory Council of Chinese Advisory Council of the United Way Greater Toronto. And the other project is looking into anti-Chinese racism during and before the pandemic, supported by the University of Toronto. My talk will also be based on a community project entitled Intergenerational and Intercultural Dialogue to Fight Racism. It's implemented by the Chinese Age-Well Research and Education. It is within the framework of anti-racism, anti-hate project supported by the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism, Ontario provincial government. I see many of our 老人茶室 seniors and the core team members, and many of my students are attending the event today. And I do want to take the opportunity to thank my team members to run the community project and my students for their professional assistance in research. I'll just summarize our key findings in the following 4 points. Point 1, everybody would experience racial discrimination anywhere, anytime. And COVID-19 made hidden discrimination surfaced. Our first wave questionnaire survey conducted in April 2020 at the initial stage of the pandemic indicated that 12% reported racism experience, and Chinese men and women, highly educated or not, rich or poor, speak English or not, older or younger, immigrated to Canada earlier or later, had the same chance of being discriminated. Our second wave of questionnaire survey conducted in early 2021 indicated that 23% reported racist experience, and it is double the 2020 rate. This later survey indicated that younger people, those people with poor financial or health status, are more likely to report racism incidences. Point 2, anti-Chinese racial discrimination is more pervasive than we have realized. There are difficulties in recognizing racism, and their whole experience racism may not report the incidences. Our 9 focus group discussion indicate 56% reported racism experience before we started the focus group, and has been revised to 75% of the focus group. It is almost 20 percentage points increase. Point 3, there are tremendous challenges faced among Chinese seniors in fighting racism in Canada. I listed only 2 of them here. A significant number of seniors believe that anti-racism was not a priority issue for Chinese seniors. B, a small number of seniors believe that there were only some minor issues in discrimination, but there were no systemic racism in Canada. Some indicated that Canada has done a very good job than many other countries. The last point, Chinese seniors are also resilient and could have creative means in fighting racism. For example, the Chinese Age-Well Research and Education has a writing group and a drawing group. Our seniors have been working together with middle-aged and younger adults in fighting racism through arts, including writing poems and making drawings. The poetry is a unique way for seniors to express themselves that are helpful and empowering in overcoming cultural and structural barriers. Our community project helped expand our immigrants' social network while boosting their self-esteem, mental well-being, personal growth, self-actualization, and a sense of belonging. Let me stop here at the moment and look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Thank you, Professor Zhang, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue with you as well in your important work with the lens to seniors. And you know, speaking on my parents' behalf, I just reminded them that I'm actually speaking on this panel today. You know, I just think that you're doing such incredible work, and so thank you for that. So now let's maybe transition to Jin-Ling Chang, and I'd love to hear from you in terms of how racism shows up for you as in terms of the realm of education in schools, and what are the key challenges that you're seeing and that others are facing at the moment. So over to you.
Thank you, Betsy. First and foremost, I'd like to thank CCAC as well as United Way for bringing together more than 100 people on a very important conversation. And thank you for the invitation and the humble opportunity to be able to spend about 6 minutes talking on this very important subject. The focus I want to do is on a project that we undertook last year with young people in school boards that involve teachers. The key identifier there was to encourage young people to understand the identity and belonging, impact that racism, discrimination, and bias have on them. But more important, the project connected school learning with community. Part of the project young people did was to go into the community, identify what we call voices unheard, community members who have experienced discrimination, bias, and talk and bring the story back and represent them through art. We were very grateful for TD Bank for funding this project last year, and as a result, this year we obtained federal government funding for the next 2 years to continue this project because of its impact. So next slide. So where I want to show tonight is exactly what Olivia Chow said. Professor Wei Guo gave us some very clear statistics and data about the racism. Tonight, I bring with you the stories of young people, and I'm only the voice. The stories they gathered from the work they did with the community through art and through their words. So what do their stories tell us? So for me, data is stories, the power of narratives that Olivia talked about. Next slide. So this is Jason Cho. He drew this piece of art on plexiglass on the front and the back. And this is what he writes. In my artwork, I've created a piece that focuses on common stereotypes and misconceptions of Chinese culture and Chinese people. It shows how I feel when I do not meet those expectations. What are those stereotypes? Yellow peril, model minority, and on, forever foreigner, perpetual foreigner. So there are many forms of stereotypes that the Chinese face, heightened by the COVID pandemic as a result, as we have heard this on. This topic I've always wanted to talk about, and one that I can relate to a lot. But I didn't really know how to express my feelings, so I chose to create this art piece. The front side of my piece emphasizes a figure balled up in the center with swarms of hands pointing and reaching for it, and hurtful messages red scattered around. This side represents what others think about me and my culture and my community. In contrast to the front, the back represents how the figure feels deep inside. The figure is in the same position, surrounded by a dark background to symbolize the feeling of being alone. Two large Chinese characters are written, besides spelling out the words hardship and sadness. So what Professor Wei Guo says in statistics comes out, the stories are about impact, the impact of those acts that we hear, whether from Nation, for Olivia Chow, on our young people. Next slide. Asia is not a country. The Asian diaspora is indeed Chinese, but Asia consists of 48 countries. This is a story of Christy Lee, a Korean Canadian, called Struggling Connections. As you look at her art, listen to her story. This art piece represents the struggles or barriers I experienced. On the left side, it shows a girl holding a mask with a smiley face, while her actual face is sad. She's not clothed as the image is very raw. This side also represents the struggles of moving to Canada, shown in the black and white pictures I can see at the bottom of the Canadian flag. The right side has same girl smiling in a traditional Korean dress, and the pictures on the bottom represent a happy life in Korea as they are in color. The pictures are shaped in puzzle pieces, and the Canadian side and Korean side will not fit together as there are barriers. The middle will have a girl that has two flags tied around her mouth, not allowing to speak. Due to the barriers, she is silenced. The establishment of interpersonal relationships is hampered by barriers which can lead to misconceptions. These misconceptions lead to conflict, frustrations, offense, violence, hurt feelings, and a waste of time, effort, money, and people's lives. Powerful narratives that young people went into the community, listened to the stories, and interpreted through art and through the artist's statement. Next slide. This is Giovanna Lucas, a Filipino Canadian. They share the same pain as Chinese Canadians or Japanese Canadians or Vietnamese Canadians. Her story harks back to the time of 1993 when Canada enacted the Live-In Caregivers Program, where Filipino Canadians landed here to provide essential help as caregivers to young children and the elderly. By law, has to live in the house for 2 years before they can gain citizenship. Yet, domestic help by women dates back as old as Canada. When European domestic help was brought, they were immediately made permanent residents and citizens. This is what one of our Asian community faced, and this is what Giovanni writes. Imagine living in a third world country where going to school requires an annual fee, or where kids can only eat rice and canned food, or one must work for several hours for a meager amount to try to provide for a large family. I choose to talk about the overseas Filipino workers who live for years at a time just so that their children can live a good life and have a good future. My mother left us when I was only 3. She missed my first day of school and 4 of my birthdays. I felt sad because I barely knew her during that time. She must have also felt sad because she wasn't there for her younger son's developmental years. But I am grateful for all that she did, because finally, after 10 years, she was able to bring me to Canada. In my art piece, I chose the image of a Filipino worker leaving their families who are colored in gray. to symbolize absence in their children's and husbands' lives. The paper document behind is a work permit that they have to sign to live for 2 years in someone else's home with no basic rights. In our culture, the mother is described as the light of the home. Without them in the family, it is empty, sad, and dark. So tonight's forum that brought us together is so important. It's so important. Olivia pointed to some actions we can have. And finally, I want to end with a poem written by a Vietnamese Canadian young lady, Thu Duan. Next slide. I am Asian. I wonder if it is wrong. I hear lots of cruel words about my country, culture, and color. I see injustice, people fighting against discrimination. I want racism to have no place. I'm afraid that rallies will become too uncontrollable. She's fearful, this girl. I pretend that I'm okay. I feel sorrow when my community is attacked. I touch my tears on my face. I worry that fighting will become more serious. I cry for the physical and mental pain that is suffered. But I'm starting to hear people find their voice. I understand we can solve the problems immediately. I say that we belong in a world where there's justice and love. I dream of a world without racism, a world that celebrates differences. I try to educate so that where prejudice does not exist. I hope that negative perspectives can be changed. I am Asian. I'm proud of who I am. The transformation that Olivia talks about. These 4 youngsters went into the community, took those stories and retold them through art and poetry. They are our hope and our optimism. Because through this transformation, these are the same young people that talk about what they can do. So I just want to end on a note about the role of parents as protective factors. Next slide. Hughes' research shows that Asian parents compared to any ethnic group are least likely to foster conversations about race and discrimination because it's awkward, it's not necessary, and in education, in some of our work, we are beginning is to help parents to engage in conversations of racism. Hughes et al. Work showed that preparation for bias and discrimination is very important. Parents for whom race is a central social identity and those who believe their group is negatively valued with low public regard may be especially likely to discuss discrimination or preparation for bias. Those are protective factors because you help your child to manage those emotional impacts that could lead to depression, identity, low self-esteem, and psychosocial and academic outcomes. So tonight, I want to say to parents who are here, or caregivers, or grandparents, or uncles and aunts, do engage in conversations about race. And as we say, very often through stories, to what you watch on television, to misrepresentation on social media. I will end with a story that a parent shared with me. The graves of missing Indigenous children hit the news. She was giving her bath to a 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old surprised her. Her little daughter says to Mama, "Why is the news talking about dead children?" So the mother explained those are Indigenous children who long ago have been abused in schools and they were buried and nobody talked about them. The little child said, "Why does it take so long for us to know about it hundreds of years? And why is it children that get killed and not talked about?" Those are powerful moments for the mother to begin to have conversations that's age appropriate because you're parents. you would know how to talk about it to your child, through a picture book, through a poetry, through animation. Those are very important action that we can do as we build understanding about the importance of the rivers. At the same time, we should also share stories of progress that Canada has made, stories of apology by the government. And I will stop now because we also have to celebrate the progress Canada has made towards anti-racism and the solidarity that has made us a fairer and more just society. I'll stop here now. Thank you.
So thank you, Jen Lang. That was very moving. And as a parent of 2 daughters, I know that I learned a lot. Very moving stories. And so thank you for that. We're going to be rounding out this part of the session with Alfred, and he will be talking to us a little bit about Frontlines and then highlighting some of the work the Center for Immigrant and Community Services is doing to deal with anti-racism. So Alfred Lam, if you could maybe highlight some of the work that you're doing and some things that you're seeing as it relates to anti-racism, that would be super. Over to you.
Thank you, Betsy, and my thanks to all the speakers that have gone before me. I've learned a lot and been inspired at the same time. I want to keep my remarks relatively brief, and I want to focus on some of the work that we're doing. But I want to come at the issue and the topic perhaps at a different level, at a perhaps a little more individualized or personal level, because in our work we found that, you know, through working with our clients, that's where they encounter racism, right, at a very person-to-person, individual level. And just about everyone I've ever spoken to about racism and related issues, even though they may come from different views and different backgrounds and different opinions, they all agree on one thing, and that is racism is taught. No one is born to hate. We seem to agree on that much. And tonight, I want to offer you this question, because if that is true, if racism is taught and not something that we're born with, then I think one of the most important questions that we face tonight is, well, then who's doing the teaching? How is it taught? How is it learned? Where is it taught? In my own personal experiences and in the work that we do and in encounters that we've had, you know, barring more extreme examples where people are intentionally radicalized toward racism, for most people with racial or racist attitudes, their racist attitudes are not a well thought out or well-formed set of philosophy or ideology. Almost always, it comes from hearing and believing in narratives or stories that are false and untrue. And that's where they learned it. That's how it's taught. Now, as important as this forum may be, that kind of teaching doesn't happen in formalized setting like this. It happens around the dinner table at home. It happens in a locker room following a game. It is around lunchrooms at work. It is in the language that we use every day. And I want to add that even though tonight's focus is on anti-Asian racism and a very important conversation that we need to have, all of us, regardless of our culture and our background, all of us are capable and at times guilty of these types of attitudes and sometimes even words and action. For most people, racism lives and is fueled and fed by bad stories and narratives. And the way that you combat a bad story, as the speakers that have gone before me have mentioned, the way you combat a bad story is not with a clever argument or a set of statistics or in a convincing debate. The only way you combat a bad story is by allowing people to experience a better story. And that's one thing that we have learned in our work at CICS. That is a good story that someone personally encounter and experience beats a bad story that they might have only heard or have been told. And so part of our work at CICS is to create opportunities at the grassroots levels in the community where people can interact and share their stories with one another. You know, a remarkable thing that we learned from encountering people perhaps with discriminating attitudes towards, and it doesn't matter what the focus is. It could be against people of color, it could be against the LGBTQ community, it could be against the indigenous community, it could be against a certain racial group or racial community. What we found is that people who hold those discrimination or discriminating attitudes towards a particular group of people almost always never have any personal connection with people from that community or that population. Discrimination, we have learned in our work, lives in misinformation and isolation. And we talked about the importance of inclusion, right? Not just tonight, but in conversations, such as this one. And one thing that we've learned is that inclusion is not meant to be an act of charity where sort of one group of people decide to include another group of people. What we've learned is that inclusion happens and only happens when I find myself in your story, while at the same time you finding yourself in my story. And just to give you one example of something that we do, at CICS, we are a multiple service organization. And one of the things that we do, one of the services that we offer is that we offer a food program. And as part of that, we have a food bank that regularly feeds over 200 families each and every week. As part of our food program, we operate a community garden where we grow and produce almost 2,000 pounds of produce a year to supplement the food that we receive from Daily Bread Food Bank and Second Harvest and other providers, just to make it enough for people to live on. And so as part of that community garden program, we regularly bring together people to volunteer together to grow foods. And at one of the events recently, I was observing different volunteers working, and I saw a group of volunteers harvesting eggplants. And I overheard a conversation where two people from different cultural backgrounds were engaged and talking about their childhood stories, how they enjoy eggplants and how their moms used to cook it as part of their cultural cuisine. And that conversation went on, and they were learning from one another. They were sharing laughter and sharing stories. And it became for me a living and breathing example of the kind of work that we need to do. Right? Racism is fueled and fed by bad stories. And the way you combat it is by having people experience a better story. And the way organizations such as us can make that happen is to create platforms and create opportunities where those stories can be shared. And I would conclude my remarks here, and back to you, Betsy.
Okay, well, Alfred, thank you so much. That was very inspiring. And, 200 families fed is just extraordinary. Thank you so much for the work that you do for the Chinese and Asian communities and the communities at large. I want to firstly thank all the panelists today, and we're going to be moving into the second part of our discussion, which is, I think we've got around 10 minutes or so, maybe 8 minutes for a Q&A. For those of you who have questions, please put them into the chat, and it's under the Q&A segment, so please do that. Because I don't believe that we have any questions so far from the audience, I'm going to maybe start with some. And, it's just such a privilege to moderate this panel. All of you are so extraordinary at what you do for the communities. And I just, the stories that you've already told really inspire me. I thought maybe we will start with Professor Zhang, and maybe if I can ask this, Professor Zhang, of you. When you look at culturally appropriate ways to address racism in the communities, particularly in population groups such as with our seniors and with parents and educators and newcomers, What are some of the ways that you would suggest be appropriate in terms of ways to address racism?
Thank you, Betsy. Actually, I have been thinking about this question for a long time, and I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure if we have a culturally appropriate measure to deal with racism. Many of us are talking about the Chinese, the soft yet firm, a kind of a strategy like Tai Chi, to fight against racism. But I'm not sure if that is effective or not. We have been doing that for some time, and we still need to see the result. I just want to mention, actually, among Chinese ourselves, we belong to a diversified group. We are the people from, Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China, with the sub-Chinese culture. The other thing is that, the older adults and younger adults have very different ideas related to racism and how to deal with racism. And that is a generation gap that we are talking about. And our senior Chinese are more influenced by traditional Chinese culture. And many of them, came here to Canada after retirement. They are familiar with Chinese culture, but they are not familiar with their Canadian culture. And many times they have their vulnerabilities themselves, to get around, in the community. And many times they probably couldn't even recognize if a certain gesture or behavior or racism or not. And certainly, we have different kind of perceptions, and among our seniors as well as youngers. But come back to our culture, I think probably because of this diversity, the best way is actually to combine all the strengths among the seniors and among the younger adults, work together to fight against racism. I think probably we should need to use a kind of a holistic approach. For the seniors, I mentioned about the challenge of the seniors. The priority for seniors is more related to health, to care, to housing, to transportation. They need to, can easily move around, have a nice place to stay. And those are the issues that we need to address. And together, it's not just address racism. It's not just tell older adults or younger adults what are the racism, right? And of course, there are some awareness kind of issues that we need to address, but we need to really empower our seniors so they can work together, deal with the isolation, the health issues first, right? And then work together with the younger adults, to fight against racism. I think, I'm not sure if there's a culturally appropriate. If talking about culturally appropriate measures, probably we should use a kind of language or gesture or strategy that is familiar for those people who hold the bias, the stereotypes. We need to use a kind of a strategy, the language that they can easily understand. So, the message pass over. So that is some of my thought. I welcome, the comments from others.
Yeah, Professor Zhang, thank you so much for your thoughts. I thought they were very profound, very relevant, especially, my parents moved to a larger condominium, and their happiness has been very much improved. And I think your point about the home and how important it is to seniors is really important. And so with the remaining time left, we've got 5 minutes. And I know that there's a number of questions that were posed in the Q&A.
谢谢张教授哈，我的父母也是在老人院住着的。
Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to get through them today, but I'm sure that our 4 panelists will have some remarks on them. And I think that, I would encourage that, following this event, we circulate the Q&A, and then maybe some of our panelists can get back to the audience on this call as a next step. And so with the next 4 minutes, I just want to maybe then move into another question, and then and maybe we can take this and do your top thoughts on this as a panel, and starting with Justin. And so Justin, in terms of the fight against anti-racism, what are the key things that you think about as a greater emphasis and focus? Where do you think we need to focus now?
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. I think the focus has to be on building that solidarity within our communities. I think there's a lot of divisions within our communities. And I think that's what's so impressive about the history of Asian Canadian organizing in Canada is we've done this before, right? We've built that solidarity across our communities to fight for things, whether it's the head tax redress or other issues, right? We need to do that now because it's a dangerous time. It's a dangerous time for Chinese Canadians. It's a dangerous time for Asians. We got to build that solidarity within our community, and we have to build that solidarity across our communities, with Black communities, with Muslim communities, with Indigenous communities, with the larger Canadian society, to fight together against racism and say we're not going to accept exclusion, we're not going to accept intolerance, right? So I think that's the big point, and we got to commit ourselves to learning about what it means to live with other diverse communities, right? And to unlearn our own prejudices as well as we come together to build a better future for all of our communities.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate that. So solidarity and learning is what I'm taking away from your remarks. Maybe let's go to Jen Lang. And Jen Lang, what would you say are your top 2 items?
I would think that within the field of education, representation matters. Alfred asked, where do the kids learn racism from, or where do adults learn racism from? I think the curriculum in the classroom is critical. And racism comes not only just from negative representations of a community or an individual, but from an absence of representation, when they do not see themselves. So how many people know of the first Asian female medical doctor in Canada, Veronica Chung? They never heard about it. So the absence of representations of excellence, of contributions to Canada, of having shaped Canada, the representation changed the story of our railroad workers of being victims to that of builders of the Confederation. The Chinese contributed to the Confederation, connected the Pacific coast, Atlantic coast. That was where the Prime Minister of Canada at that time brought in 1,700 Chinese railroad workers from China. So we changed the narrative in a school, as the Black Canadian children say, we are tired of hearing ourselves as slaves. So they talk about the contribution of the first Black Attorney General, Jean Augustine, the first Black female MP, and the contribution to shaping Canada, to making Canada a multicultural. So we replace negative representations with positive, or in the absence of representation, to begin to do that. And this year, there's our work. Last year, from TD funding, we learned about the stories of barriers and pain. This year, with the federal funding, which is second phase, we have 450 students participating in 5 district school boards in looking at representation matters. Where can we put back positive or absence of representation? If a child only sees stories of success through crime, they gravitate to crime. I'll be a drug pusher. That is where I get my money. But if a child begins to see stories of, I can be an astronaut, I could be a successful entrepreneur, I can be a successful poet, I could be a successful hip-hop person, it changes their self-esteem, it changes their aspirations, and I think it builds solidarity. I want to end with one story. In our work, empathetic recognition that Alfred and Justin talk about, when the kids went out to the community, the biggest success of that project was when a group of Black children say, I want to tell the stories of anti-Asian racism. They begin to take on community not their own to challenge and to advance the elimination of racism. That is a success. I'll stop here.
And Jen Ling, thank you so much. And so representation means so much, and I think you articulated it so well. Alfred, I'm going to give you the last word. And so on this topic, what it would be your one takeaway that you'd like everybody to take away from this piece?
In a fairly recent study done by the Conference Board of Canada, I think in partnership with McGill University, the study was called "Are We Good or Are We Lucky?" And basically the study looks at the fact that a lot of times Canadians think of ourselves as very accommodating and open and welcoming people. And so the study went about to survey residents across Canada to see whether those attitudes are true. And the study found that shockingly, xenophobic and racist attitudes are just as present among our population as anywhere else, you can think of. And echoing what Justin mentioned in his remarks, we know that, racism attitudes, anti-Asian racism is not a new phenomenon. It's been around for a long time. And so the main takeaway that I think we need to focus on, or one of that we can focus on, is that it's been around for a long time. It's been a long time developing, and it will take time for us to find solutions, right? And so engaging our youth, engaging our children in this education process is crucial, right? Some of the work that Jen Ling talked about in schools, the conversations we have around the dinner table at home, as parents watching of our own racist attitudes and language and not passing it on to our kids. I think those are some of the crucial elements that we need to think about. And let me just end with this. Racism is only one issue of social injustice that plagues us as a society. And I think one of the ways that we can learn to combat it is for us not just learn to fight the issue of racism, but also to be champions against issue of other social injustice, right? Poverty, for instance. And the way that we engage ourselves by standing in solidarity with other people groups that are oppressed is one of the powerful ways that we can begin telling a better story for people to experience and see from us.
Alfred, thank you so much. And standing together is what I'm taking away from your discussion, the importance of children, the importance of being champions of social injustice. And so thank you so much to all the panelists here. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. And I think before I hand it over to Jenny, I just want to thank the United Way for this event. It's been an exceptional one. And I've learned a ton. It's best use of my hour and a half that I've had probably in a very, very long time. And so over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Betsy, for beautifully moderating the discussions, and thank you to all panelists. I know we are almost out of time now, so I just would like to thank everyone. The Chinese Community Advisory Council chair and the Chinese Community Advisory Council members, core group, and all United Way staff who helped out put it together. And also thank you, especially big thank you for each and every one of you for attending this event. But before we go, we would like to get the takeaways from you by doing a poll. Can we do that? I know all of us, we all have learned a lot, so inspired, and we would like to this is a multiple poll. Say, by attending this event, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm glad to see, wow, the number is still climbing. Wow, that's amazing. I'm glad to see multiple takeaways from all of you from today's event. Thank you so much. Thank you. And everyone, you have a good night. Thank you. Thank you. Good night. United we stand against racism. United we are stronger.